The Hangout on Air is live. Are we live? Looks like we are live. Does it seem like we're live or no? Yeah, it looks like we are. Okay.
I feel like we're live.
You're feeling it? You feeling the audience? You feeling the love? All right, we are live with Digital Hammurabi. How do I pronounce that? Is that the correct pronunciation?
That's
exactly right.
Spot on.
Okay. Spot on. Excellent. We are live with two noted, perhaps atheist biblical scholars, perhaps not. We are going to find all that out. Why don't you guys start out introducing yourself, and then I'll start asking you questions.
You want me to do it?
Yeah.
All right. I'm Dr. Joshua Bowen. This is Megan Lewis. She's really close to finishing her PhD. We will both have PhDs in Assyriology from Johns Hopkins University. Assyriology, for the couple of people that might not know what that is study of the languages and culture of the ancient Near East. So I specialized in Sumerian and Akkadian linguistics, and Megan is working.
I studied royal inscriptions, looking at the connections between inscriptional themes and the objects they were inscribed on and what they were used for.
Okay, so you're not. Are you even technically biblical scholars in that sense? Would you just?
I'm not. I can read biblical Hebrew. I took it for 3 years, and then I was required to take comprehensive exams for my PhD in biblical Hebrew. But I'm not a biblicist now.
Okay.
I got my bachelor's degree from Liberty University in religion, and then I went on.
That's Jerry Falwell's university, isn't it? Isn't that Falwell?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And then I went on and got a master's in theology from Capital Bible Seminary, where I wrote my thesis. I focused on Old Testament studies. I wrote my thesis on the meaning of the divine name El Shaddai. And then at Hopkins, I minored in Hebrew Bible.
Right. So you were geared up. I've watched a little bit of your interviews on other channels. I didn't want to watch too much because I wanted to be, but you were geared up, as my understanding, to become a fundamentalist, to be as that form of a biblical scholar, correct?
Yeah, definitely. I pastored a church for 7 years. I was a chaplain in the Air Force.
Okay, so we'll get into that in a sec. Before we start down that road, you are English?
Yes.
Megan?
Yes, I am.
And okay, so my wife is half English. So I've been to England twice. Yeah, I've been to, her aunt and uncle live out in the West Country, Dorset.
Oh, lovely. That's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely lovely. I love it there. We've been there twice for about a month each time. We stay with them. I love it there. I grew up in New York City, or not in New York City, but outside New York City. And I've been to London a bunch of times, but I was not prepared at all for the culture shock of the West Country. Because if you're in New York City in a bar and you're in London in a pub, there's not that big of a difference. It's a cosmopolitan city, talk about the same records, same things. But you get out in the country and it's really, really, really English, like really English.
Local
it was
pubs
wild.
In villages are very, very different.
You bring your sheep in with you. So.
you bring the dog to the pub, and we go to the pub at 5 o'clock.
Yep.
And they were there. You would love them. They're probably your cup of tea. They used to live in London, and he played for the Philharmonic. I think he was like second clarinetist or something like that. Yeah, he's really good, really talented musicians, both professional musicians. And then now he runs girls. I forget. He's like the headmaster at a girls' school or something like that.
Oh, cool.
They're basically retired,
and
they live out in the country. They have a nice little country.
Oh, beautiful.
Converted farmhouse. It's fantastic there. It's seriously, like, I love it so much I can't even deal with it. So that's our common bond. You and I are we're
friends already.
We're paisanos, as we would say in the old school. Now let's talk about Liberty University. So you started out. When did you're not an atheist? Explain, or you are? I don't know. You tell me.
I mean, I guess I can go into as much or as little detail on that as you like. So yeah, I was raised in a very fundamentalist, conservative Christian household. And I joined the Air Force when I was 17 and started to do my bachelor's degree through distance learning. So and of course, Liberty was the natural choice. So I got my bachelor's there. and then applied to become an officer, become a chaplain. And to do that, you had to go to seminary, which of course I wanted to do anyway. So I enrolled in a Master's of Theology program, which was a 6-year program, 126 semester hours, graduate school.
Okay.
So yeah, then I went to Capital Bible Seminary, which is just outside of DC, and then applied to Hopkins.
Now you don't, so you guys aren't necessarily presenting yourself as atheist biblical people necessarily. How do you see what you do online? How would you paraphrase it?
It's entirely educational. We're both very passionate about the field of Assyriology and the study of the ancient world in general. And one of the things that we both noticed is that there's a real lack of good information that's easily accessible to people who don't have the time, energy, money, or just inclination to spend the best part of a decade at university. And there's a lot of stuff accessible for things like Egyptology and classics. There's just a lot of information out in like the public sphere, and there isn't that same level of availability for Assyriology. So we're trying to fill that gap and provide easily digestible but still academically rigorous information for people who are interested in it.
You have a very interesting accent.
Thank you.
New York. you can hear it if I talk long enough. You'll pick it. Most people get it. But I've lived in California for over a decade. But
I was referring to her, trying to be funny. Your accent is also very interesting, Craig. No question.
Oh, no, it's really not. But that's okay. It's pretty standard issue New Yorker, man. What's up? Hey, Joe, you kidding me? You listen to this kumbaya? Okay, so question before we start into the meat of the thing. Do you guys know who Jonathan Pageau is?
No.
No, okay. And you know who Jordan Peterson is, correct?
I don't.
Sort of. You've probably heard him.
I have.
A little bit.
Okay. Is he
okay, so why I bring both of them up is Jordan Peterson, how I first heard of him, he's becoming in vogue, sort of an intellectual in vogue. And he has Old Testament, he has a lecture series on the Old Testament, the stories of the Old Testament, but it's from a psychological point of view. Mm-hmm. Like he'll analyze the story of Noah's Ark, trying to get at the metaphorical truth underneath the story. So that's how I first heard of him. He's now becoming a household name, but I'd heard of him before he was becoming a household name because I was interested in his take on the Bible. And I thought you guys might be, but your focus doesn't seem to be so much biblical as I was expecting.
Josh does a lot more biblical stuff than I do.
Yeah. So Megan, so to kind of understand this, maybe put it in context, just so we're clear, Assyriology is basically going back to ancient Mesopotamia, right? So okay. Assyria, Babylonia, going back to late 4th millennium, all the way down into the period of the Old Testament, right up until the fall of Babylon in Babylonian 539 to Cyrus. So we do that. That's we're trying to make that whole damn near 3,000 year period palatable to just regular people.
Okay.
But because of my specialization in Hebrew and the Old Testament, I also bring that in and make those connections. So I do things like go on the Non Sequitur show, I go on Scholar Fiction show, and
right.
I'm sort of...
They're kind of using you for counter apologetics, but that's not necessarily...
No, I mean, I'm perfectly happy to do that. I guess I'm there as sort of a resource. So, you know, when I go on the channel and you have somebody saying Leviticus 25 doesn't talk about owning foreign slaves, they can look at me and say, does it talk about owning of foreign slaves?
Right. Okay. So they're using you with a definite agenda in mind, that is counter apologetics. You know, they're trying to reference something to challenge the authority of the scripture.
No question.
They're not doing it they're not doing it because they're just really interested in, like,
this is true. This is true.
Okay, so I do have a dog in the fight too, but it's very different than everybody else. Digital Hammurabi is a legal code, correct? Why is Hammurabi famous versus there are a lot of legal codes from the time? Am I wrong about that?
No, there are several. I'd say the Code of Hammurabi is famous because it's big and it's pretty.
Yes.
It's on a huge stela that has some fantastic carvings, and it looks a lot nicer and is much more appealing.
Yeah, and it's extremely well preserved.
Yeah, it is
very long.
It's much more well preserved than some of the other legal codes we have. And
they're not codes, but sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No. Feel free to talk over me as much as you want. Here's the question where I'm going with the legal code. So there's nothing in the actual content of the legal code that makes it, because they're the only couple legal codes that a layperson has heard of is the Old Testament, obviously, and the Hammurabi Code. Mm-hmm. And I looked on a little bit of research. I found there's like 30 or so. What's the basis for the Hammurabi Code? What are the laws? Are they just common law? Are they?
Well, no, there's much ink has been spilled on Hammurabi's law. It was called a code, but that's sort of a misnomer. This idea that it's this set of normative legal prescriptions that you can go back to, and they're written in such a general way that you could any case that you have you
can find the appropriate ruling on the problem is they're incredibly specific.
Incredibly. So
and they're weird too, aren't they? Really, like, freaky laws in there, like stuff that would trip out a modern person.
I mean, as far as the ancient Near East is concerned, no, they're pretty standard for the most part. The interesting thing is, there's a prologue and an epilogue in the text, right? And they're literary. Both of those things are literary. Okay. And it's Hammurabi is probably commissioned this thing to be written this way, and he's basically saying, and Megan could speak to this because this is sort of what she does, but Mesopotamian kings, that they're responsible for a couple of things, one of which is shepherding the people in a just and righteous way, right? So they're stand-in for the god in a sense. And so they're responsible for taking care of the people. And so Hammurabi lays out this, extraordinarily long text full of all these different laws to show, to demonstrate not only to the people, but more specifically to the gods, look at how pious and just a ruler I am. And what we know, Botero, for example, has written a very famous chapter in his book,
Writing, Reasoning, and the Gods?
Yes, Writing, Reasoning, and the Gods, where he talks about the law code. And one of the things that he does is he matches up. One of the beautiful things about working in Assyriology is that, unlike the Old Testament or the New Testament text, where we just have copies of copies of copies, we actually have the original cuneiform tablets, the clay tablets.
In large quantities. We have a lot of data to work with. We're very lucky.
Yeah, so we can take this early second millennium statue, stele, that has all these codes on it, and we can actually find many contemporaneous tablets that have legal cases on them. And you can match them up in some cases. So, for example, I'm going to get the details of it wrong because it's pretty obscure, but there's a guy, the text says, the legal text says, so-and-so went to this other city to try to free like his relative or something, and he ended up not having enough money, and so he appealed to, I think, the palace, and the palace wouldn't give him the money, and so it is decreed that he can appeal to the temple to get that money, something like that. And you see, but it's a legal text, so it names all the parties involved. In the law code of Hammurabi, it has that, and it says, if a man, very generally, goes to another city to free a person,
all of the details from that particular
very
text.
Precisely. And it's like,
So what he's done is recorded or commissioned the recording of actual law cases that happened. It's not like
it's almost like precedent. It's almost like you're reading the actual. It's almost like you're digging into the casework itself to some degree.
Yes, exactly.
And taking all the names out. Yeah.
Now, in the Old Testament, there's a part where Moses hears the rulings of the. Isn't there a part in the Old Testament where people come and present the cases of the people to Moses?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and he rules over them.
Yeah, and of course.
Now, here's a very specific question. Hammurabi, do they the Old Testament is rumored to be these are the laws of God? Is that true of Hammurabi? Is that true of other legal codes of the time? Did they base them on Word of God, or how did they say these are what justifies their laws?
The king is put in place directly by the gods.
Right. Okay, so that's what I thought. So it's divine right of kings.
Yeah. So the king's rulings must be just and pious, because if he wasn't just and pious, he wouldn't have been made king.
And that's something I think very important to realize in Mesopotamian culture, is that if you read a text like the Sumerian king list, which of course if you study the Old Testament, you're probably familiar with that from reading passages like Genesis 5, Genesis 10. But the Sumerian king list, sorry, I forgot to turn our notifications off. The Sumerian king list talks about all the reigns of the different kings, and how kingship was given to this city and then it was taken and given to this city. But that's really an important thing to remember, is that the gods dictated which city would have kingship, and it was always for a period of time, and then it was taken and given to another city, and then oftentimes it would be brought back to the same city. But this idea of the king being a just and pious king, so many of those things were predicated, I think, in the minds of the people on the king fulfilling that role in a just way. So,
okay, so is where in the Old Testament, supposedly Moses gets the law directly from God. So Moses himself is also subject to the law. Is that true in Hammurabi? Or is he the law? Do you understand the in the divine right of kings? I have an operating theory in the Old Testament, and you can tell me if this is true or not. That it's unique. Now, it might not be unique. I have no idea. But it's at least a unique idea that Moses himself is subject to the law. He's the lawgiver, but he can't break the law either, because it's not coming from him, at least in theory. Is Hammurabi making the law, or is he getting it from? Is he like divine right of king? Is the king says what the king says is law? Period. The king is God for all intents and purposes. I mean, that's subject.
Yeah, that's true. I think Gilgamesh, for example, would be a good test case for that. And Gilgamesh is known even from the early Sumerian texts to mistreat his people. He's taking that role of king, and he's not performing it terribly well. And so the gods take action to correct him.
So while the kings, it's not like you could bring them up in a law court necessarily, but if they, for example, if they fail in battle, if they become sick and die, that's kind of seen as a divine repercussion for them not behaving in the proper manner.
Right. That's God's displeasure with the king. That's showing that the king doesn't actually have the right to rule because God didn't back him. That's kind of the idea in that? Okay, got it. Now, so why do you call yourself Digital Hammurabi? Is it just a cool name, or is it sort of central to what you are about? It's a cool name. I'll give you that. It's a cool name.
So Megan taught a class at Hopkins for her. She got a teaching fellowship, and she was going to. One of the things that she does is works in digital humanities. So, if you've been studying the Bible, linguistically at all, you might have a program like BibleWorks or Logos or something like that. where they've digitized the text, they've tagged it, and made it like a, so that you can search on different lexemes and grammatical forms and so on. That's sort of digital humanities, right? It's taking texts, for example, and digitizing them in such a way that you can use them, obviously with a computer.
With more ease.
Yeah. So that there's been a movement since I think really the 90s to try to, maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, to bring Assyriology, all these cuneiform texts, all these Sumerian and Akkadian texts, to try to make them into digital format, right? So there's a electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature, ETCSL, which is something that we always talk about. That's got all the tons of Sumerian literature on it.
The main Sumerian dictionary is an online resource. There is also a large variety of just digital projects that are currently being run by Assyriologists.
So Megan is in that. She's doing a digital humanities dissertation. So that was going to be part of that course that she taught, and so she was trying to think of a way to marry,
to kind of get the
something old and something new.
I
got it. Okay, so you're,
and everyone knows who Hammurabi is, right? So using him just was a bit of a no-brainer.
So she called it Hammurabi in the Digital Age.
Yeah.
And then we went on the
that's good too,
show.
Actually.
Yeah.
And they tried to correct you. Okay, go ahead.
No,
we jumped the gun.
So we went on the Non Sequitur show, or I guess I did, back in April maybe, and they said you guys need to start a channel, which I thought was a really weird thing because I didn't know that YouTube had things called channels.
It's been a steep learning curve.
Indeed, for me primarily.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay, so let me ask a couple of spiritual questions before we go forward. You described yourself to me, Megan, as agnostic.
It depends largely on the day and how I'm feeling.
Okay, that's a great answer.
I was raised Anglican, which is the closest you get in the States is Episcopalian.
Right.
And the religion I grew up with was very
dry.
Calm. Well, yeah, a little dry, but very calm and gentle. And going to
peaceful.
Church was like a nice social event to catch up with people in the village. And the Christianity that I was taught was very much focused on do unto others as you would have done unto you. The Bible was never held up as this historically infallible document. So for me, learning about the ancient world didn't particularly shake any
foundation
feelings.
of your right, because your faith wasn't rooted in the Bible being
exactly
6,000 years old. And if somebody says if you find out that it's not, I know that happened with Josh, we'll get to that in a sec. But if you find out that it's not, there goes, you're shattered completely.
Exactly.
So it was kind of a cultural thing, your Christianity?
Yes, and it, like I said, it depends very much on the day and how I'm feeling, which is a little bit of a strange thing to base a religious conviction.
No, that makes complete sense to me. My mother would answer exactly the same way, and ironically, so would Jordan Peterson. Atheists are always trying to pin him down. He doesn't really believe in God. And before I became a Christian, I would have answered the exact same way. I hung over on a Sunday morning. I'd be like, someone's like, you believe in God? I'm like, no way. No. Friday night, I'm watching like the Little Drummer Boy on TV, and I got like 5 beers in me. You believe in God? Yes.
Definitely. Yeah, exactly.
That makes complete sense to me. Go ahead.
I very much view the Old Testament as an historical document produced by a set group of people. I don't view it as divinely inspired. I think, and Josh, this is a view that Josh put into words for me some years ago. I think for me, the best way to view it is as one society's attempts to relate to the divine. I don't think it's terribly applicable to modern society, but I think it's a fascinating document in and of itself.
Do you read it outside of, do you take any interest in it as like literary or read it?
Yes. I mean, I haven't in recent years because I've been quite consumed with my PhD dissertation. But I think it's absolutely fascinating.
Okay.
And I do enjoy it just as a work of literature and poetry and history and all kinds of stuff.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, and then I'll go to Josh, it's very similar to my mom, but she was raised more devoutly Catholic. She was a little bit more hardcore. It wasn't just like a gentle little, you go to church on Sunday. It was more intense. She wanted to be a nun, but she went to college. Well, she's weird. It wasn't common. She wanted to be a nun because she's weird, and she's weird now too. But she's religious about feminism and liberal politics now. She's very religious, but about other things.
I think your mother and I would get on very well.
Yeah, I think you.
She's in the chat actually right now, so.
You would really get along with my wife's aunt and uncle, who I mentioned from England. You would love them. Oh my God, you and them are the same. From how you would love them, honestly. But so she's kind of. If you ask her now, she say, "I don't know. I'll find out. That's an interesting question. I'll find out when I die." And
yeah.
But she sometimes is moved in a way that she'll describe as spiritual. Like she goes to an art museum and she's like, the only time, she said this to me, her words, the only time I felt that type of feeling is in an art museum and in church. She doesn't go to church, but she still said that. You know what I'm saying? So it's vague, but it's not, no, there's no God and I don't believe. It's like, so that what you said, am I reading you correctly?
Yes, I think so. I think so. And I mean, Josh and I got married in my childhood church, and I still do attend church sometimes when the baby permits me to be awake enough in the mornings to get to church. But it's not maybe the drive that it once was.
Where do you live? Where do you guys live?
We live in Southern Maryland.
Okay. Now, Josh, your relationship to this question is a lot more complicated, correct?
Indeed.
Okay. So you were a fundamentalist with a real dog in the fight till what age? Roughly. I mean,
I guess 30. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And if from what I heard, this is what I heard on other channels. You tell me if this is wrong. You were a literalist, and then somewhere along the way, you knew that literalism was inaccurate, and that completely shattered your faith. It was like the game. It was done. You couldn't believe in any, like she can still accept some of it, sort of. You were like, no, if they're lying to me about that, forget it. That's over. Correct. Okay. So go ahead. You talk now.
Yeah. I mean, my grandparents, when I was, 4 or 5 years old, used to play Who Am I with me. And they would say, I survived the flood on the ark. Who am I? This is the sort of fun stuff that we did together. So I mean,
oh wow, yeah. Atheists are like salivating right now, going propaganda at a young age. Propaganda.
I mean,
I swear that they're lined up to pounce on that. All right, go ahead. Catnip to atheists.
It was the core of who I was. And there's just no question about that. So, I trusted in Christ when I was probably 5 or 6 years old. And I was in church every week. High school, I was kind of an outcast at my public high school. And so I spent most all of my time at our church in Maryland. And we had a very serious youth group, went on missions trips, presented the gospel, went down to Mexico, led 300 people to Christ. We used to do ministry tours, and I mean, it was a critical,
very intense,
absolutely critical part of my life. So when I joined the Air Force, I started a Bible study, and I was teaching through the Bible. you know, and I was a very that fundamentalist evangelical conservatism came out in me, and sometimes it was always very kind, but it was a very no. We have to get down to what saith the scriptures. That was my favorite saying. You know, what saith the scriptures. You know, and so I was a dispensationalist. If that means anything to anybody out in the audience,
I'm sure it does.
But I was a very specific type of dispensationalist, right? You know, you can't be an Acts 2 or an Acts 28. I was an Acts 13, you know, so that was really important. And I'd fight somebody tooth and nail on that. And
but kindly and in a Christian fashion.
Right, in a kind and uplifting way. But you know, it was so anyway. So I like when I got my bachelor's degree, I was able to essentially clep out of so many of the courses because it was like survey of Revelation, sit down and take all the tests, done. You know, survey of Acts. Well, I've taught Acts 6 times in the past year, clept out of Acts. You know, it was sort of like that for a lot of the courses anyway. Math, not so much, you see, but I had decent grades coming out, and I got into a Capital Bible Seminary in their Old Testament Master of Theology program. I was taught by some excellent Old Testament scholars, and I took 6 years of Greek, 5.5 years of Hebrew in coursework. I taught the 2-year Hebrew cycle at one of the satellite campuses in Northern Virginia. So I took 6 students through Hebrew grammar, and then took them through Hebrew exegetical principles and advanced readings. So, I mean, like Hebrew was my thing. I took Akkadian while I was there, took Aramaic, both Targumic Aramaic and Biblical Aramaic. And anyway, so, you know, the Old Testament was a really serious thing for me. So that's why I initially wanted to go to Hopkins, because my professor told me I used to go up and talk to him at all of the breaks that we took in class, which I'm sure didn't annoy him at all. And I would say, Professor Meyer, let me ask you a question. If I want to be the greatest Old Testament scholar, how do I do it? And he said, well, the high road is to learn Akkadian, you know, become proficient in Akkadian. So I started looking around at programs that would teach me Akkadian. And Hopkins had a phenomenal program. Still, it obviously does. It's gotten, I think, even better since I started. Just amazing professors there. And Dr. Del Nero was was going to be my advisor, and he's obviously amazing at Akkadian, but he also specializes in Sumerian. And he said, I think you ought to do Sumerian. A lot of people do Akkadian. You should do Sumerian. But it was at Hopkins. I mean, I remember when I left. During this, and I ramble on. I apologize.
Well, no, I'm just get us to the key points, the moments, because I've heard them in other places.
Yeah, I would say this also builds up to
how do we summarize this? You're a really intense student of the Bible, and it's a consuming passion. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, definitely. Passion. And the thing is, during my master's program, I was pastoring a church. I was an associate pastor of a church for 7 years. Did chaplain ministry in the jail. I mean, so when I started at Hopkins,
so passionate Christian too.
Oh yeah, no question, no question.
Okay, I hear some sense of, and tell me if I'm hearing this right. Not in anything you say, just in matching this up with things you've said in other places. Some sense of I was cheated, or I was lied to, or once I found out that this was wrong, not I was mad, but something. Go ahead. Sorry if that sounded weird. If that was weird, sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, I try to be introspective when people pick up on things like that. I don't think that's the case. I think I was upset because I didn't see it, maybe, but and frustrated because of this academic mindset that I had, but it was actually sort of there was a progression as I went through my master's program. I was a mid-Acts dispensationalist, and as I started to learn Greek, I realized this doesn't work. So that was a huge part of my life, and I had to leave that behind as I transitioned through learning the biblical languages. So I was already sort of going through major changes.
Right, but the things that you're learning, because your faith, there's some mechanism here that I don't understand. It's very common to fundamentalists. So you were totally fundamentalist, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And
the Bible was the inspired, inerrant Word of God. All 66 books down to the morphemes and the different grammatical forms were inspired by God. And
right,
textual criticism.
I'm trying to understand the mechanism, how you start to learn some things and then that just shatters everything.
Oh, I mean,
I get it, but I don't really completely get it.
So I mean, I think it happened in my first year at Hopkins. There's a 3-year history cycle that you have to take. And you study Syro-Palestinian history the first year, and then you study Mesopotamian history the second year, and then Egyptian history the third. So Syro-Pal was my first cycle. And I remember there was an advanced student that was going through with me, and he said, "So you're a fundamentalist Christian?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I'll be interested to see how long this lasts." And I was actually upset with him, right?
Yeah, of course you were. You started doing apologetics on him, probably. You're like, kalam, no, kalam.
But anyway, so sitting in class, and I mean, just having to confront the evidence, and I mean, I fought it tooth and nail. I fought it. This can't be right. I'm trying to find any way, linguistically or culturally or historically, anything that would, and it just got to the point where it was just so overwhelming. The data was so overwhelming. And the interesting thing, I think probably one of the other motivating factors was, a lot of the professors in our department are Christians, right? Presbyterians or Episcopalians. I mean, they're Christians,
right?
So there aren't atheists, standing up.
It's not like we were given a rigorous indoctrination into atheism.
Yeah.
Actually, unless you make a point of seeking it out, you don't know your professor's spiritual beliefs. Yeah.
And that was very motivating. That was very telling to me, because nobody was sitting up there going, "Oh yeah, the Philistines, the biblical text. That's not historically accurate." No, I mean nobody. That wasn't a thing.
No.
It was, all right, here's the data that we have. Let's go through the archaeology. Let's go through what the texts say.
Are you saying that it's taken in standard scholarship? Now, this may be controversial to the people in the audience, but I think I'm hearing you correctly, that nobody is even debating whether some of these things are rooted in truth. It's just taken as standard scholarship, that it's not historically accurate? Is that what you're saying?
That's a complex question.
Okay.
So I would say
that's a really good answer. That's a complex question. Okay.
Sorry. So I would say there are certain things that are not debated.
People don't generally debate whether or not the flood happened.
Yeah, that's
right. Okay, so that's taken as a standard academic.
But the more historical passages that deal with the Neo-Assyrian kings in Palestine.
When you get into
that's used as evidence because we know these kings existed. We know there were conflicts.
Right. Okay. So
area.
let's come at it from a different way. Are there undisputed passages that are historically, like the Babylonian exiles? Is that
are historically correct?
Yeah.
No question.
Because I said that to my mom once. I was like, everybody knows that Babylonian exile really happened. I don't even know if that's true. Yeah. Okay, so there are parts of the Bible that are not disputed, that they're historically line up with reality.
No, I mean, I think that's true of any. I mean, she works in royal inscriptions, right? So royal inscriptions are inscriptions put down by kings or set forth by kings, and you have to sort of do the whole rake and shovel, right? You have to You have to rake in the stuff that you suspect is probably historically accurate, and then shovel out all the stuff that's not. So when he says he was born of a dragon,
probably not,
right?
Right. And you treat the Bible in a similar way. You accept that this was a document written by people who have their own biases and their own agendas. So you do your best to identify what those biases and agendas are, so you can better understand the text and try to get a closer view of what actually happened.
Yeah, and I mean, I think some of these things, for example, Ezekiel 26 is a really good example. You know, the prophecy against Tyre. We actually have a fair amount of information about Tyre and about that siege. And even though Ezekiel got it wrong, right, and of course says so 3 chapters later, we know that siege took place, right? I mean, we have inscriptions, you know, we have these, we have this information. So, I mean, it's not that the siege didn't take place. It's not that Ushu wasn't destroyed, you know, that sort of thing, or that Nebuchadnezzar then turned and went down to Egypt. It's just you have to be able to look at that text and say, or what's historically accurate and what's a prophecy that's standard for the ancient Near East. It's not like Ezekiel went to bed that night, or I mean, you know, woke up 13 years later and saw Nebuchadnezzar hadn't taken Tyre and went, oh gosh, you know, now I'm going to get killed or something. You know, the mindset is different, I think, than we approach. But you can rake and shovel, you know, that sort of information. So,
right. So, but there, to understand the shattering of the faith, it's because this part wasn't true, and the scholarship, as far as you're concerned, the scholarship spoke the truth loudly, and you had to acknowledge that truth, and now all of a sudden you can't believe in, or are you an atheist? I mean, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. I'm sorry.
Well,
are you an atheist?
I was.
Kyle and Steve's influence, you know, watch out for those guys, because they'll try to sign you up to the program.
Steve will influence me to be an agnostic. So
yeah, but then yeah, whatever. He'll just influence you poorly. Either way. Anyway, anyway to slice it.
You know, when I was in class, and I mean, I remembered I said this in one of the streams that I did sometime. I don't remember when. Somebody asked me how long was that transitional period between being a fundamentalist believer and becoming an atheist, and it was about an hour. It was really just I remember sitting in class going, I don't know what to do with all this, right? I mean, this is just so clear. And because my world was constructed, my theological world was constructed, if it were a spider web, it's not like the inerrancy of the scripture was one of the spokes or whatever, you know, hanging on a tree over here.
The linchpin.
It was the center. Yeah, it was the cornerstone. It was the keystone, right? And that thing came out, and it was like the whole thing went. And I remember I had a friend, Mark, and he used to come up. He was an evangelical Christian with me. We went to seminary together. He would drive into Baltimore every week to pick me up on a Thursday, and we'd drive down, go get some pizza, and walk around a parking lot. And he was sort of there as like a counterbalance, because I'm wanting to just throw God out completely, you know, and he's, you know, all right, you know, let's think about it a different way. Come on back, you know. And
so he's trying to keep you in. He's your friend. He's trying to keep you in the fold.
Yeah, but I mean, but maybe not so much that, but he was just trying to keep me from going crazy. And
shooting up a post office.
I mean, he did a fantastic job. I'm really indebted to Mark because I think after maybe a year, I just kind of settled into a very comfortable agnosticism. And it was because another student that I was at Hopkins with, one of my best friends, he's out in England now doing a postdoc. And we were at a conference in Chicago, and I was in this strong atheistic position. And I said, look, look at the biblical account of the flood. And he said, what do you mean by that? What's the biblical account of the flood? And I said, what a stupid question. You stupid man, you know, what do you mean the biblical account? Look, it's right here, Genesis 6-9. Come on, it says the whole, he said, wait a minute. You're making an assumption about the genre of the text. Is the genre of the text a historical account? And it was such an eye-opening moment for me. I was like, well, I don't know. And he said, well, let's look at these other ancient Near Eastern texts that you're so familiar with, that you've translated through. Is the Sumerian flood story a historical account? Well, no. Well, why does the Bible have to be one? And it was just, so I'm greatly indebted to Caleb as well.
Are you guys interested in what I said, that Peterson's framing device for the stories in the Bible? Does that interest you at all?
You mean it as metaphor?
Well, okay, so for something like the flood, I don't know for a fact that he doesn't think there's a global flood, but I'd be really surprised if he did. I mean, I don't know that for a fact because he doesn't really say one way or the other. But he's analyzing it as the flood is a metaphor for chaos that can overtake you at any moment. And building an ark, you're hearing from God. So, I mean, he's got this whole, his metaphorical, what he calls a metaphorical substrate in the place of the flood isn't all that great, to tell you the truth. But in some of the other stories, it's actually compelling. He's analyzing like Cain and Abel, not as these are two men who obviously lived in history, but what's the point of the story? What's the underlying metaphor that the story is trying to convey? Kind of like you would with literature, I guess, but more as a spiritual text than not. Does that interest you?
I mean, I'm sorry.
I think it's a very interesting way of looking at the text, and probably very helpful for a lot of people who don't live in ancient Israel. I'm not sure that would have been intended by the people who wrote it. And for me, a lot of what I do professionally is looking at the context in which things were written and trying to get a better understanding of what that text was intended to do by the people who wrote and used them.
So how would you say that? What you just said? How would you define that? What they were intending when they wrote?
I mean, I think those are very clearly etiological myths, right? So, for example, the Cain and Abel story. Well, really, just the entirety of the first several chapters of Genesis. You know, we're trying to explain, these are people in probably the 5th century, trying to explain in Babylonian exile, trying to get their stories straight, right? Trying to get their tradition together in written form.
Who we are, why are we here, where did we come from,
Right.
what's our history? Especially, and I think that's especially important for a group of people who have been ripped out of their homeland.
Yeah, no question. And that are facing what is very clearly a dominant mythological motif and tradition there in Babylonia. So, you know, when you come up on the Genesis text, for example, and you see similarities to Babylonian myths, that's not a coincidence, in my opinion.
Okay,
I think they're trying to explain, all right, you know, why is our God better than Marduk? Why is our God better than Asher? And so these are myths that explain origin, right? They explain why something began. Where did they come from? Also, we should probably point out, we're not watching the side chat. So if it's like blowing up and you guys are...
It's probably blowing up, but I don't know which way it's blowing up. It's definitely blowing up. I mean, who knows which way? I don't know.
People do have
I'm just
questions,
interested.
I should just say this. If people do have questions or they want to challenge us or something on that, that's absolutely fine. We're very, very welcome to do that. You can comment on our videos on Digital Hammurabi, our YouTube channel, or you can email us at digitalhammurabi@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter.
At Digi_Hammurabi.
At Digi_Hammurabi. So, sorry.
Yeah. And if any of you want to provide links that says, like, you know, counteracts anything they say, you're free to do that too. I'm just asking them questions. I don't have people on my show to challenge them. That's not my agenda. It's to find out what they know and how they came to their beliefs, and to get as clear a picture of what they believe is possible. And that's all I'm trying to do. That's my only agenda. It's not to challenge them at all.
I think you're doing a fantastic job at it, by the way, Craig.
Well, thank you. I have some specific questions that I've never done with any of my guests so far that we'll have to get to when we start getting close to running out of time. Here's one question that really interests me, for you in particular, Josh. It's Josh, right, or John? Mm-hmm. Do you read the Bible as just to read it, or is it done?
When you say just to read it.
Okay, here's really what I mean. Do any parts of the Bible, before I was a Christian, I didn't necessarily do this with the Bible that much, but I would read something that spoke to me. And let's say the book of Psalms. A lot of people are attracted to the Psalms because they find them soothing. How she described going to church. A lot of people are attracted to, not because they're necessarily, fundamentalists are a totally different animal than most people's relationship to religion. I mean, it's really hardcore versus most people's relationship it's something really nice that they have in the background. And they connect to it when they want it or they feel like they need it. They're going through, a death of a loved one. So they start reading the Bible and they start talking to their pastor. Other than that, it's something in the background that they draw comfort from, but not in, fundamentalism is very intense. Most people don't have that type of relationship to religion at all. Is that correct, Megan? Would you say that's right?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so do you ever read the Bible? When you have a relationship like that, it would not be uncommon to just read the Bible and have it speak to you. Read the Psalms and they make you feel better if you're hurt. Do you have any type of, anything that ever happens to you? Do you ever read the Bible any way other than, do you read it at all? Let's start there. Do you still read it?
Oh yeah, I mean,
for pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, from a literary standpoint, sure. Most of the reading that I do now, just because I have limited free time, and the free time that I have, I'm trying to prep for things on YouTube. But like I just translated through Isaiah 53.
Okay, so what are your favorite parts? And Megan, you feel free to answer this too. What parts do you guys like? As just like, some people like Isaiah. Some people like, any parts you like?
I've always been a big fan of Jeremiah, but Jeremiah, there's just so much wordplay and, the two pastures and, looking at how he deals with the potter. But Jeremiah is sort of a soft spot for me because, okay, I'm sounding really nerdy. Sorry.
Yeah, it's lovely to go for it.
But I do like Ezekiel. And I like that chapter 26 was not redacted. I think that's very telling to me, actually, for its authenticity, because you would expect a failed prophecy to be redacted, and it wasn't. Which, I know that not every. I think there are several. I think probably the majority of good scholars would agree with that, but not everybody. So, but yeah, sorry.
I like
Megan,
Ezekiel.
you have Ezekiel.
Yeah, I think the prophetic language is just absolutely fantastic. It's absolutely fascinating to read. I enjoy that very much. I like actually lots of Genesis. I think they're really interesting stories, and they're familiar stories. They're what I grew up with, and I do like some of the Psalms as well. Actually,
yeah. Well, most of the Psalms go over well with most people.
Yeah.
They have a ecumenical sort of, most people have a soft spot for the Psalms. Most people have a soft spot for Jesus usually.
Yes. And I really love singing hymns. So I think I enjoy a lot of the Psalms because they're often the source material for some of my favorite hymns. So.
Yeah, I like singing the old hymns. That's fun.
What was I going to ask you? Oh, T.S. Eliot. This is just curiosity. Do you like T.S. Eliot, Megan?
I mean, what I've read, I've enjoyed, but I tend to stick more to science fiction.
Okay. Just because he references Ezekiel a lot in The Wasteland.
Oh, interesting.
Son of Man. He's constantly referencing Son of Man in the same voice that it's used in Ezekiel. And there's a point to that in the poem. It's kind of like The Wasteland is sort of the destruction of, you could argue, church or spirituality in Western civilization. That's kind of what The Wasteland is metaphorically referring to. So he references Ezekiel a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys do kind of read the Bible sometimes for pleasure or to have it sort of speak to you in a way that I would consider almost spiritual.
Yeah.
I mean, in a very loose sense of the term, but not, that's how I would define that. I don't know if you would. I don't know if you're comfortable with that, but you guys don't seem that that dogmatic one way or the other. You're just kind of like, yeah, I just find that as spiritual, sure.
You know, Craig, you asked me something, and I think I got a little bit of clarity, I think, on it. You asked me if I got angry, or if I got not remembering exactly how you said it, but like,
did you feel like you were gypped off because you were?
It's interesting because I really, it's been, I guess, 8 years since this happened. I haven't been angry about anything religious at all, really. I mean, not frustrated maybe, but not angry. I'll tell you, I've become a little angry at times, which is hard to believe, I know, with people on YouTube. And
really?
Yeah, the reason that
I can't imagine why. They're awesome.
It's a very specific reason. And it's because I remember, so I shouldn't get too angry, because I remember I would have done the same thing as a fundamentalist Christian. But, you know, if you believe that that the biblical text is inspired and inerrant, and you interpret it in this way, that, you know, someone that is saved, you know, if you read 1 John 3, if they walk away, well, they were never really saved. And there is nothing, for some reason, there's very little that gets my blood boiling than somebody telling me that I didn't really believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ for that's 25 years.
That's huge with ex-fundamentalists. You know how many times someone's told me that on this channel, when people say you weren't really a Christian, and they go, I've heard that 1,000. I get that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I don't normally say it, but I do think it at times to the people that say it to me. I know more. I have forgotten more about the biblical text than you will ever know, and that sounds really arrogant. I mean it that way in my head.
Right. But they're being presumptuous about what you were written. Yeah, I mean, I understand the anger. I mean, I understand why people feel that way, because it's not being said to you, like, it's not taking your point of view at all. That's why one of the reasons why I have atheists on the show and I don't challenge them is because I think there's a value to that, to just having them talk. So even if your goal is evangelical, even if my goal was to challenge your scholarship, it'd be a much smarter way to do it is to hear everything that you have to say on the subject first, and then challenge it, you know, a month from now after I've studied what you have to say.
Yeah,
no question. Challenge it short term is who cares? So I beat you in a debate. That's what Twitter's all about. And so I beat you in a debate, and that everyone's going to forget in 2 days. So,
right. And the other thing, I guess, is that and I've alluded to it, but I mean, I understand it. And so even as I say these things, I'm feeling kind of bad that I just said all that stuff, because I really shouldn't feel that way. I get it, because it's a very disconcerting thing to see somebody who was a fundamentalist evangelical Christian.
That's why they do it. I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I really, you know, I take it all back. I take it all back.
No, wait. No, we don't have to take it back. No, we don't have to take it back.
On your behalf, so that's fine.
No, that's really not.
And I can tell if she gets mad, look out.
There's a reason I don't read the chat anymore when he's talking to Skylar, or if he's doing a biblical Hebrew stream anywhere, because it's just, people are so mean about him. So mean.
I mean, look, I'm ugly, right? I mean, but we can all accept it, you know, but you don't have to call it out all the time.
Well, okay, so why that happens, and why it doesn't happen with me at all, even though I'm a really committed Christian, you might not get that. I am, is that I don't have a defensive position. There's nothing about your take on the world that's threatening to me at all. You know, it's just what happened to you. Other people are threatened. You know, because of the conclusions you came to, and the fact that you came to them, from what I can tell, honestly, that's doubly threatening. Correct?
Yeah.
No, I think that's a very astute observation.
Thank you.
And it's.
Did you hear that, chat? Astute observation.
And I find it frustrating, because we're not out to like proselytize for agnosticism or atheism. We're just.
No, I get that.
We're just trying to share information that we are lucky enough to have, and that we think other people might be interested in.
I mean, really, honestly, the reason that we got onto YouTube in the first place was I was listening to the Non Sequitur show because I happened to stumble upon it. And I heard somebody making an argument from the Hebrew in Genesis, actually. And I just thought, my God, you don't know Hebrew. How is this possible? How can somebody make an argument from a language they don't know and feign, pretend to know it? And so I after hearing it for a while, I sent Kyle an email and said, look, I don't know if this is what I do. If you ever need to talk to me, he called me and he said, you're coming on the show on Sunday. And it's sort of
but then you understand, I mean, the blowback is you don't mean to be in the fight. And I even hear your reticence to be positional in this debate. It comes through loud and clear. That's why I wanted you on my show, actually, because I thought it'd be an honest conversation. And I don't really have a dog in this particular fight. I think there's value to just hearing this all spelled out clearly, even if your goal is evangelical. But when you go on the Kyle show, now you're part of what they want to present as, the truth. So,
and I'm okay with that, and I'll tell you why.
Go ahead.
Because I think the same thing is true on Skylar's show, and I love Skylar to death. I love Kyle and Steve to death. I think the reason that I'm okay with it is because I was born into and lived the majority of my life on the other side. I know the scholarship that's out there,
right.
And the reason that I think when I'm on Skylar's show, for example, my point in being on there is to say, look, let's look at the reality. In my opinion, what is the reality of the genre of these texts, right? So we're reading through the book of Genesis. And when I hear people come on and challenge him and say, that's not what the Hebrew says, or that's not what the Greek says, or that was not the Aramaic or whatever. I could honestly care less, really, if Leviticus 25:44-46 says that you can own foreign slaves and treat them as property and hand them down. Like, that doesn't really, I don't lie awake at night one way or the other on that. However, when somebody comes on and says that's not what it says, these are indentured servants.
That you hear that as fighting words, because that's your job.
I just think, you're incorrect. Please show me your data. How do you get that from the Hebrew?
Right, but this is where this gets really complicated, because, and I have questions along this line too, related to this. Are there Christian scholars with a dog in the fight, and you said you work with some, I guess, whose scholarship you view as sound? Does that question make sense in light of what we're talking about? Do you understand?
Oh, yeah. I would say Lawson Younger is a good example. I mean, Caleb Howard, Dr. Caleb Howard, who's my best friend going through Hopkins. Amazing scholar.
I'm not a biblicist, though. I mean, he can do biblical studies, but
I mean,
he's an Assyriologist.
He is an Assyriologist, but he's working. His postdoc is in.
Oh, right. It is,
he's working.
I take that back. I shouldn't have said that.
Is he at Cambridge?
He's working for a Christian institution.
There's a Christian institution out there. It's huge library out there, and he's working doing Sumerian and Akkadian and Hebrew and Greek. I can't remember what it's called though. But his.
So you respect his scholarship, and he is Christian?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The thing is, he would
Caleb is a smart man.
Oh my gosh, he wrote. Well, anyway, no, but I mean, Caleb would say things like, Genesis 6-9 is etiological myth, and he would say. But
before he left the States, ran a Sunday school.
Yeah, he taught at Moody Bible Institute for a while. He went to Trinity Evangelical Seminary, out in Chicago. So it doesn't.
Right, so there's a fundamental error going on that you are part of. Not you personally. You guys are scholars first, correct? So you're going to go where the evidence leads, and hopefully you're going to be as non-biased as possible.
We're going to get torn apart if we're not non-biased, right? Okay. I mean, other academics will eat us alive if we let bias guide our scholarship.
See, I take it as a matter of faith that there is a place where these two are reconcilable. Other people are threatened by it because they don't think that those two poles are reconcilable. I think they have to be. If my faith is rooted in truth, then you discovering the truth is not threatening to my faith in any way, shape, or form.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm a sane person, and you discover the truth, then I just need to jigger because with you get why people are threatened, because you got some delusions pricked and it shattered everything.
Yeah.
They're fighting that same dog. That's why they're so threatened.
Yeah.
I'm not.
I think this is why I'm an agnostic, right? Because, I would say right now, if I had these discussions actually with Caleb, maybe in our 4th and 5th years at Hopkins, and I said, how do you know that the God of the Bible is speaking to you? How do you know it's not Enki or Enlil? How do you know it's not?
Who'd you say? You said this to somebody?
To Caleb, this scholar, PhD friend of ours out at Cambridge. I said, how do you know that? Because this is what we were talking about at 5 a.m. as we were translating Sumerian.
As you do.
As you do. And
you usually do that. That's what I was doing in college too. 5 a.m. I was translating Sumerian.
Translation time.
And he said, oh, I can't prove that to you. It's subjective. It's subjective. My faith is subjective. And I mean, I think if I ever become a person of faith again, if I ever believe that God exists again, which I mean is not an impossibility, it's going to be through subjective faith. It's going to have to be. Mm-hmm. So I would differ, I think, with a lot of fundamentalist people that I encounter that are very much like I was, that would say, no, we can reason back to God, or no, we can find evidence, for these sorts of things.
Well, they're potentially right, but you have to start with, you can't start from false. You have to start from truth.
Yeah.
They're potentially right, but you can't ignore this.
Yeah.
You can't, I ignore this and I can reason my way back to God, but I'm not dealing with this weird elephant in the room. You have to deal with and actually contend. Indeed. So the apologetics have to line up with basic reality and basic truth. So you can't scam your way through apologetics. I take it as faith that they're rooted in truth, or there's mistakes in the Bible. Either way, I'm okay either way. I'm not losing sleep over it either way.
No, and that's what you should be. I think that's what you should be. I think that's a very rational
reasonable
position.
If I look at, I'll even look at Noah's Ark Christians stuff up to a point and go, okay, maybe it's possible there is a global flood. Let me watch your video on the subject. And if I find it convincing, I'll be convinced.
That's how it should, in my opinion, that's how it should be done. Let people present you the evidence they have so that you can evaluate it based on the merits of the argument and not based on the Bible says it, so it must be true.
Yeah. Right. And don't immediately dismiss something because it's coming from, in our case, for example, if it's coming from a fundamentalist position. I just interacted with a topic that, going into it, I went, well, I know this material pretty well, and I don't think this position is right.
But
let me read it.
Could be wrong.
Yeah, let me read it. Right. Take a look. Maybe I missed something.
Yeah.
And I didn't, but
sorry. I did.
Sorry.
Spoiler alert, I didn't. That guy's wrong. I didn't get anything. He's wrong.
Sorry.
But no, I mean, what you're saying maps up with basic common sense. And if you have too passionate a dog in the fight and you're looking to the end game, then you're not dealing with basic reality. Yeah. And even if your agenda is evangelize and witness the gospel as true, you still have to deal with the basic reality. When somebody says extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, you have to kind of listen to that. Yeah. If you're going to go to the hardest part of the Bible for somebody to cognitively process as a reasonable human being, you're going to have to give them a miracle or be reasonable, one or the other. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah.
If you're gonna be a fundamentalist or like that, then you have to produce a miracle, give somebody a reason to follow, or be reasonable and take where the scholarship is at as your starting point.
Yeah.
Right? Am I wrong?
No, I think you're spot on. And one of the things that we do, given our expertise in like Sumerian and Akkadian in the ancient world, we run into Zecharia Sitchin followers a lot, right? Ancient aliens, and aliens built the pyramids, and there were fiery rockets flying around in Sumer. And the problem is that, we just did a live stream for 2 hours about this topic, right? And you would think that, and probably most of the people in your audience would think that's ridiculous, right? Aliens didn't make humans. The Mesopotamian gods weren't real gods that
wandered around Babylon.
Yeah, coming from the 10th planet that we've never seen in our solar system, right? But in order to properly evaluate their position and to disprove it, you have to engage with it, which
you have to look at the evidence they present,
which can be mind-numbing, right? It can be, and to read through that book and to go, oh my God, you clearly don't know Sumerian, but I can't just say that he didn't know Sumerian, so you don't have to listen to him. But that doesn't convince anyone. It's okay. Look, let me prove to you that he didn't know Sumerian. Let's look at this, and let's look at this, and let's look at this. In order to do that, and you have to honestly evaluate the data and engage with it. And I think that's just the only way that you move forward, honestly.
Right, but from what I get from you two is I see why you call yourself agnostic. Probably when you're on an atheist show, you lean towards calling yourself atheist. But I don't hear a strong dog in the fight. I don't hear, I am really committed to proving anything. I hear,
and I will always say that I'm an agnostic, and I'm not a. Somebody asked me this. Sola Dea Gloria, I think, asked me if I'm a Huxleyan. I'm not a philosopher. Like, are you a Huxleyan agnostic? I was like, God bless you. What does that mean? So I went and looked. I think that's what it is. Where I say it's impossible to know that God exists. I am not that. I'm the soft agnostic.
Right.
Yeah.
I just don't know. That's probably where I was when I was like 20 years old. I don't know, and I don't really care. I'm interested in like drinking with my friends and trying to pick up girls. So I'm not really all that interested in theological questions. Thank you very much. But, now I've changed.
It's 5 years later, now you've changed.
But I mean, as far as engaging even non-believers, there's a way to engage them constructively and a way to not engage them constructively. And if you're an ambassador for Christ, if that's what you're called to be, okay, you don't start out with the thorniest bone of contention between you. You start out with where you might agree, and you start talking from there. I mean, to me, it's common sense, right? Or no?
Yeah. No, definitely. And you don't, for me, the way to go about it would be actually to just get to know people and find out their story. And then from a point of mutual understanding and friendship, then start saying, look, I know that the Bible isn't really your thing, but could we maybe talk about it sometime? Rather than just beating them over the head with it.
Totally. I mean, if you don't, you wind up doing what happened to Josh. Is it Josh or John? Josh. You'll step on, without even knowing it, you'll make presumptuous errors, and you'll read the person wrong, and you'll say completely the wrong thing and toy them out, aggravate them. You may be even well-intentioned, but you have to start. Like, that's why I have atheists on the show, to just talk and feel and communicate. It's like you need to find out what's actually going on underneath the surface. You can't just, even if they're, you can't just, anyway, I think you guys get it. What?
Yeah. And I think it's a very valuable thing to do, to speak to someone that disagrees with you. And I think it's something that probably needs to happen a hell of a lot more than is currently going on, because it promotes understanding and friendship.
It's hard. It's hard to, I guess it's hard for a lot of people to do. For me, it's relatively easy because I don't take your beliefs personally.
Yeah.
I don't find you threatening. I can do it with conservatives, liberals, I can do it fairly easily because I'm not, what your beliefs are not necessarily that I don't find them threatening to me personally at all, so, but I can tell that you guys aren't really, I would never classify you as dogmatically atheist in any way, shape or form.
No,
very, very,
definitely not. Definitely
right.
not.
Well, that's obvious in talking to you because you're not trying to push an agenda either.
Is that disappointing? Sorry if that's disappointing.
No, it's not disappointing to me at all. I prefer it. Just dogmatic atheists get on my nerves, actually. They're stressful to talk to. I will, but it's a lot more, I don't know. How Megan described her faith is how a lot of people are. And it makes complete sense to me, and I don't even know if she described faith. What would you say you did, Megan?
No, I think that faith is a good word.
Yeah, that's where a lot of people are.
Faith or confusion.
Yeah, but a benign confusion, a confusion that's like reassuring, gives you a sense of peace. It's not existential angst confusion. I gotta go like. So I thought this. Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing. I understand what you're saying about dogmatic atheists getting on your nerves. That being said, I do understand their frustration as well, particularly interacting with them as I do, because they're coming. See, I was the one antagonizing them, growing up, right? So I'm the one getting, doing the Matt Powell, approaching them in the locker room. Hey guys, if you die today, if you go to hell or not. It is. You
and I would not have got along if we'd met any.
No, definitely not. So and being in that environment and growing up, surrounded by that sort of thing, I can understand now being on this side of it going, look, guys, just we're in a locker room, let's not talk about that right now. Were you actually like him though? Were you kind of like as unreasonable? I was pretty unreasonable. I actually think that I don't want to compare myself too much to Matt Powell because I think he's a despicable human being. But I don't think I was as, maybe arrogance was the difference. But I mean, I knew that Jesus Christ was the only way to get to heaven. And I knew that he died for all of our sins. And that trust in him was, that was it. If you didn't have faith in Christ, you're going to hell. And I mean, it motivated me to get a big packet of. Would you actually like evangelize like in totally inappropriate places like that? Like a lot of people like, shut up, dude. I would change clothes. I didn't consider it inappropriate, but I mean, like, I remember walking through the mall with a friend of mine, and we were passing out tracts to people. And people are just trying to shop for Christmas. Here you go. Here's a tract. Jesus died for you. If you want to talk to us about it, and having to be asked to leave by the security guard. And I did. Right, but that's at least more appropriate because I might even do something like that. I haven't, but I could envision that. But talking to somebody in a place where they're doing something else. Well, I guess shopping counts as something else. I never did it in the locker room. I thought it was a good, because I just heard Matt Powell talk. I don't know if you guys know who that is, but talk about. Oh, I'm sure that everybody does. Everybody watching will know who that is. For example, when I was in the first church I went to when I moved out here, one guy, we went to see a movie called The Green Mile, which is decent. It's relatively spiritual connotations. A lot of people in my church tripped out on it. Like, I can't believe this is a powerful move of God. This is so powerful. God is speaking through this. It's got spiritual connotations for sure. I think it's a Stephen King story, and it's decent. But so I wasn't with him, but I heard about this and I winced.
the movie ends and he stands up in the movie theater and goes, "Do you know, you could all accept Jesus?" And I was like, "Oh my God, that's painful." That's like painful. That was painful to hear about. And, you know, that's just not my style.
No.
It's not at all. And it's not a good style, honestly. I had people, my church was actually a lot better in terms of people had actual interpersonal skills.
Yeah.
I'm serious. It's in Malibu, and there were celebrities and there were wealthy people who actually did have some sort of, you know, street smarts, and they were able to interact in high capacities. So that's not something that would be common. But even with them, if I saw them I worked at the local Radio Shack. If I saw someone from my church, I'd wince because they'd be painful. You know, they do something obnoxious that instead of me helping to, because some of these people I was actually almost got to the church, and they would blow it for me because they'd come in and start being too in your face, super spiritual.
Yeah.
You know, in a way that was designed to show that person how super spiritual they were, and really, really weirded the person out. You know, it's the exact opposite of like smart, or whatever.
Right. Effective.
Reasonable. Yeah. Well, if you're judging it on effective, it's terrible. Like, I mean, it's absolutely terrible, because I would have a lot of people kind of interested in, you know, who would say, "Yeah, I'll go check it out," including like Mel Gibson's son, you know, like people who, yeah, he was a local, it's Malibu. There's a lot of local like celebrities who just show up places. He worked at a supermarket I worked for. But people would come in. This one girl came in and go, "You got to come to my church," and like just get in their face and undo all of it immediately, you know, because then all of a sudden, it's not, I'm trying to sell it as, yeah, you'll like it. It's cool. It's really mellow. It's, you know, you know, and then all of a sudden she comes in and it's exactly what they fear it is. It's weird. Weird in your face and weird. So they're like, "No, thanks. You know, not interested."
And that doesn't work even on people who are committed Christians. When I first moved to Baltimore, I was shopping around for a new church, and we attended the local Episcopal church, and it was nice. It was a good service, but they clearly were in need of new members, because when I left, I was chased out into the parking lot by the pastor's wife, who then proceeded to stand and talk to me for 10 minutes and tell me how wonderful it was to meet me, and she hoped I would come back. And I'm like, I'm trying to leave. Like, she ran out of the church after I left. It was very, very off-putting.
Right. And that's exactly what it did. She thought she showed her desperation to make you join up. That's exactly what it communicated to you. This is a weird, unhealthy group of people. This isn't a healthy church. You know? I
never went back.
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine you would. That's exactly what that girl did when she came into the Radio Shack. You know, and I had been like getting some people to think that it was a good idea, who it might have helped. And threw it all out the window. One little, like, too aggressive, you know, because people are also in America. I don't know if it's true of England, but in America, people are wired for that. I don't tell people I'm Christian. Most of my friends back home don't know, because they'll immediately start looking for that. I don't do it at all, but they'll look for it. You know, they say, like, I watch this horror movie. You go, "Oh, interesting. What do you mean interesting? What, you think that's the devil?" And you're like, "Oh, no, shut up." You know, they're wired for, like, to think you're insane when you tell them you're a Christian.
Yeah.
Or to think, they're wired to discredit you. So I'm not very free with that information. I don't know if it's different in England. It's probably different in England.
It's very different. Christianity here is weird. I'm just going to say it. It's weird. And I don't fit with at least where we live, with the majority of Christian people. I don't fit. And whereas back home, I'd say that most people who go to church probably are similarly minded to me.
You're talking England. Christianity is weird here in the United States.
Yes.
England, it's...
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird to me because I grew up with something very, very specific, and it is very different over here.
Right.
Very different.
It's not everywhere.
Denominations there are. Like in the UK, there are 2.
Right. Anglican.
I mean, there's more than 2, but it's not that many.
Right, but your version of Christianity is what there's a disconnect between how people who know what you're talking about and people who know the other version, which there's also the political agenda. If you say you're Christian, everybody automatically thinks you're right wing, 100% right wing.
Is so strange. Until I came to the States, I'd never heard of a politician talking about their religious beliefs because it's just not relevant. It's completely irrelevant in the UK. No, I don't care if my politicians go to church. I don't care if my prime minister is Catholic, Anglican, Muslim. Doesn't matter. Is she doing a good job as a prime minister? And here it feels like it's maybe not the priority when you're campaigning, but it's definitely up there.
It's up there. It's up there. It will be up there too in the Democratic squad as well.
Oh no, everyone does it. Everyone does it.
But the Democrats have been downplaying it of late, and they've been becoming gradually more secularized. And I don't think they're going to keep doing that moving forward because, there's debate in the Democratic Party as to, there are two sides to that argument.
Yeah.
And I think the people who are saying we should be more church friendly are going to win.
Yeah.
It's the United States. You can't be.
I don't have a problem with my politicians attending a church. But it's their own private business. And I don't need to know it when I'm going to the polls.
Right.
Not
but
that
here
I can
it's
vote
still
in this country.
Here it's still shorthand for God country. I'm not saying this negatively necessarily. It's still shorthand for Bill Clinton squared this correctly as a Democrat. He could be non-threatening to traditional people. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. You still have to be here. You don't have. You probably don't have to be in England.
No, and I shouldn't be. I maybe shouldn't be framing it in such a negative light. It still surprises me, and it is just how politics seems to play out in the States. It is what it is. Direct quote from my father-in-law there. And there's maybe nothing wrong with it. It just is very unusual from someone who wasn't raised in this country looking in.
Right. It makes complete sense to me from being raised here. Mm-hmm. And I was raised in a really secular town.
Yeah.
Like a really secular town. I didn't know an evangelical Christian growing up. None. Nobody. I didn't meet one until I was 20 years old or 19. So you, Josh, you would have been like freak central in my town. They were like, who on earth is this guy? People would have been so weirded out by you, I can't even tell you. Because we were sort of Catholic or sort of Protestant. Most of my friends were Jewish, secular Jewish. They didn't believe in God, but they'd go to Hebrew school. Mm-hmm. But there was no such thing as like a witnessing Christian, anywhere to be found, anywhere. That would have really weirded people out. Yep. Westchester. Is your family, Josh, are they still Christians? Your immediate family and your parents, and how are they with you? Or is it weird?
Can be. Yeah, it can be. I have some family members are more dedicated than others, and they tend to.
Are you controversial? I guess is the question. Do you get?
I try to talk about the Ravens.
Yeah, that's probably controversial too. The Ravens are terrible, aren't they, this year, or no?
I can't watch because I'll get sucked into it. I don't have time. But
okay.
But yeah, so I'll always ask how those Panthers doing. How the Panthers doing. They like to talk about that for a minute, but then it's
why.
And they're probably all conservatives, right? Are they all conservative Christians? Mm-hmm. Right. See that. Yeah, I mean that doesn't necessarily one follow the other, but it follows the other in like Bible Belt and in the United States. But they don't necessarily have to, but they do here.
But they often.
So, right, totally. I was going to ask you one or two more questions, and then I guess I'll let you guys go. This has been really, really, really good. You know,
no, I've had a great time. It's been
very
fascinating.
Nice. And I'm looking forward to a month from now when you destroy all my all the things that I've said.
Oh, I'm not even sure I don't even know, like, some of the stuff that you're talking about. I don't even know. I swear, I don't even, like, when you're talking about the controversies over, like, certain things, I don't even pay attention to it. I have no idea. I did have questions written out, though. I asked you if you know who Jonathan Pageau is. I want to have you guys back, but I would love you to either watch one Jonathan Pageau video or a Jordan Peterson one video on his take on the Bible, and see if it's interesting to you. It's analyzing the symbolic content. Sure. You know, it's analyzing it as kind of spiritual, but not necessarily spiritual.
Could you send us a link for one that?
Yeah, I will. I'll send you both. How much do the controversies weigh on you, on your approach? Like the controversies over given things. Do you keep one eye on it, or you just try to tune it out completely? If YouTube didn't exist, let's say.
I mean, honestly,
you're aware of the controversies, right? I mean, you spoke about them in the context of this channel, and you thought that even the chat might be blowing up because of some things you say. You're touching sacred cows, and you're stepping on third wires. Yeah, how much does that bother you, or how much do you think about that in the scholarship?
I mean, I honestly, as a person, I hate that things that I say bother people. But
okay, that's interesting.
So really before YouTube, before I was watching any of the YouTube stuff, you know, I was translating Sumerian liturgical texts. Yeah, that's what I was doing. So I was trying to figure out what Emisol, you know, phonetic Emisol, why that was written the way that it was, which doesn't make sense to anybody. It's fine. But I meant that in that way.
But no, it's over all their heads.
It was so. That's what I mean. It was so esoteric. I was in my own little world, which is fine. But then when I started listening, and I don't know, I feel like it's a way to contribute. You know, being able to say, hey, if you guys are debating this, and this crucial piece of information, like what the Hebrew text says or what the Greek says, or, you know, if I can add that component to clarify, you know, so that one of you can say, oh, okay, that's, you know, the other guy's right or whatever. Not that they would actually say that, but the people watching maybe could say that.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't like, honestly, we're probably a little more sensitive than we should be. Because when people are upset, you know, about things that we've said, it sort of bums us out a little bit.
I'm horribly non-confrontational, and I get quite anxious. I do occasionally just take breaks from reading comments on our YouTube channel if we've had something particularly controversial happen, because I just it ruins my entire day, and I don't have enough.
Wow.
And it's problematic. It's problematic because, you know, I work full time, so I don't read them. Like, I don't read Twitter, I don't read YouTube really.
So you don't want to be controversial at all.
I just want to give people information.
That you, as far as you're concerned, you have investigated to the best of your ability, and you think it's the truth. Yes,
exactly. And
plain and simple.
We're both quite careful to say, if someone asks us a question, if it's outside, I'm probably more cautious than I should be. If someone asks me a question about like scribal education, which I know something about, but I haven't looked at in a couple of years, I'm going to say, well, I mean, I need to go away and research this, because I can't responsibly give you an answer because I can't remember.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, the controversies over some of what you do weighs heavily, kind of emotionally, on both of you. Not heavily, but okay. And if you had your preference, you would be doing like World War II scholarship, where everyone's like, "Go America!" Yeah, and everyone's like totally on your side. Everything you discover is how great Americans were.
I tell you, for me, maybe to add a different angle on this, to me, I feel like in a lot of ways, I'm coming to the defense of people in the atheist and agnostic community.
Okay.
Because, because, you know, what I see, again, and this is, I feel like I have this unique perspective of having been now on both sides of this. What I see is, like, for example, Skylar. You know, Skylar is a very intelligent guy, right? And you know, he talks about certain issues an awful lot, and yet there's and he does everything that he can without having had formal training in like the Hebrew.
Right.
He'll try to go to the Hebrew text like online, and people say, no, you don't know what you're talking about. No, you don't know what you're talking about. No, you don't know what you're talking about. And I go, but you do. He's right. Right, what he's saying is correct about this, and most. So
you're like an actual authoritative scholarly source, whereas he's a layperson.
Right.
And this is actually a huge problem with the layperson. Just to explain this, is that you can make errors as a layperson that you have no idea that you're making. People think like I researched this because I read a couple of articles on it, and you know, that's just not acceptable. You know, there's no way that you can even. Like, that's why I'm curious is Jordan Peterson, because that's a real scholar. You know, he's a really well-educated person in his field. It's not necessarily biblical. He's not a biblical scholar. He's a psychologist.
Hugh Ross is a really good example. I think of this. Like, I don't know astronomy, but I suspect that Hugh Ross is an excellent astronomer. But when he goes into the biblical texts, it's just not good. And so many people have been confused by some of the things that he says about what the Hebrew says. And so I've made a couple of videos saying, I entitled the first one, Please Stop Translating. Because it was just, you know, he's saying the Hebrew says this, the Hebrew means this word means this. No, it really doesn't at all, actually.
So people make comments on that video. You get a lot of hate, not hate, but
I got some. We're not really big enough to really draw big crowds or anything. You know what? The video that's gotten the most hits, it's just over 17,000 hits now. Sumerian grammar, lesson 1. Yeah,
well, you know, the people demand it. It's a really big seller out there. Like, I hear that all the time when I'm out with my friends. You know, I wish there was someone video on Sumerian grammar. I'm like, hey, you got to go watch Digital Hammurabi. They're on it.
I mean, but it's every day more. It's crazy. Anyway.
Well, maybe you frame it right. You know, a lot of people would be interested in esoteric forms of scholarship if you translate it clearly in layman's terms.
Yeah.
I would. I watch YouTube videos on really weird stuff. It's really how they talk, you know. If they say it so I can understand it and I don't have to actually, I'm not gonna open a book on Sumerian anything ever. Yeah. But if you guys are translating in a way that I can kind of keep pace, then I'll be down with it. You know, I'll check it out. That's how most people are with YouTube. That's how I am.
Yeah.
Okay, so one last question. I think I asked you most of the questions. I think I covered this, but is there a danger to confirmation bias on the atheist side?
I think there's confirmation bias on every single side of every argument.
Sure.
Most definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel like I have to, and I feel like we've been trained rigorously to not have that sort of bias, and yet
you can't get rid of it.
You really can't.
You can mitigate against it. You can be aware that you have it, but you can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
I mean, we're only human.
And so even reading through something like Sitchin, I really have to think to myself, okay, you know, where am I looking? Am I looking for any of the data and finding things that just support my claim and not looking at these other things, or assuming that this data only supports my side? Is there any validity to what he's saying? I mean, I have to actively go through that. So yeah, I mean, if
right. So you actually have to kind of not check yourself, but work against your own confirmation bias when you're dealing with something that's
every time
pointing towards conclusion that you wanted to point to.
Absolutely.
Okay.
No question.
And for me, just quickly, that's one of the reasons why I find peer-reviewed research so important, because if you're going to do responsible research in any field, you need to have your work checked by someone who isn't you, who doesn't necessarily share your beliefs and your opinions, to make sure that you're not cherry picking your evidence, to make sure you're not drawing biased conclusions, or at least overly biased conclusions.
I just wrote a paper. Like I just wrote a paper about a topic that is not controversial in the scholarly community, but it is controversial on YouTube. And just to double check myself, I sent it to Dr. Reed, who's a biblical scholar from Hopkins. And I said, William, just read this. I mean, of course he wrote back and said, this is debated. Yes. And he said, well, he read through it and he checked my sources and he checked the inscriptions. And so, I mean, but yeah, even for something like that, I think it's important.
Right. So it's a constant, you're constantly trying to sift that out. And ideally that's what peer review does, because you're giving it to someone with a different set of biases. So they recognize the disparity and keeps going, one to the next person, one to the next person.
That's right.
Yeah.
So by the time you get to 10 years, you have something close to established truth on the subject, or established scholarly truth on the subject.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, as from my point of view, that's where a Christian apologist should be starting from.
Yes.
Unless they're an expert, then they should be starting from what is established scholarship, unless they have a really good reason to counteract the established scholarship, like something really groundbreaking. And yeah, fine, God is sovereign is actually a pretty good reason, but you have to frame it into the scholarship correctly. You have to deal with the scholarship as some form of established truth. You can't just discard it. Are you guys interested in history outside of your subjects?
Oh yeah, I love classics. I actually wanted to be a classicist when I started in college. I love classics. I like modern history as well. I don't have time for it so much anymore, but when I was in high school, modern history was one of my favorite things to read about.
Josh?
I'm not terribly bright, so
what?
I have to I feel like I have to continuously read my
your stuff. You have to stay
field,
on,
just so I can learn that.
Just so you can keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, scholarly speaking. I mean, I'm sure there's competition between, right or no? Is there?
There aren't many of it. Maybe 500 Assyriologists in the world, maybe.
There's less competition if you're not actively looking for work.
Yeah, right.
If you're doing what we're doing and making your own work, it's like,
cares about that.
Right, but I mean, so you both are working in the actual field. I mean,
Josh isn't. I am, because I'm still a student.
Okay, because YouTube could actually be a source of income that could be really valuable to you.
That's the plan. That's the plan. Our personal circumstances mean that we can't really move to pursue careers, which is unfortunately necessary for academics. So actually, the YouTube channel is one of the ways to kind of scratch the academic itch.
And that's the other thing that we should mention, Craig, just for the people listening.
To give you money. Give us money.
Well,
join our Patreon.
Actually, no. Yes and no. So we do have a Patreon, but the Patreon, we decided when we started this thing that getting good scholars on YouTube, presenting good information was a really important thing to do. And because PhD students don't make an awful lot of money, like we've kind of gone through that. So people that are going through PhD programs now in our field don't make really much money at all. And they still have to go to conferences. They still have to travel to Europe to look at museum collections for their papers, dissertations and stuff. So what we did is we've used our Patreon. We started a scholarship fund. So every spring we're going to do something like it's akin to a Fulbright scholarship, where we're going to try to raise $2,500. We're nearly there. Yeah, we're nearly there in a monthly giving now. And then we take that money and we put out a call for proposals. People are going to send us their proposals. We're going to weed it down to like 5 or 10 good candidates. And then we're going to bring them one by one on our channel and interview them. And they're going to pitch their presentation to the viewers.
Oh, cool. Interesting.
And then at the end, all the Patreons are going to get together and have a vote on who should get the money.
It's a bit like America's Got Talent.
Yeah, I was going to say it's an American Idol of like PhD.
Right?
It's American Idol.
And that's the beautiful thing about this, Craig, and I'm a little excited about this because one of the things that happens in scholarship is that you spend so much time in the weeds that you don't learn how to communicate the importance of what you're doing to normal people that don't really care about what you're doing. Right. And so you come out and you say, oh, well, yes, obviously in the MSL form of, the phonetic writings and, like, what?
Like,
right. And people don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, so, I'll just clarify. I do, but most people don't.
Exactly. Right. Obviously. But by having these candidates, these PhD candidates come on and have to sell their project essentially in order to win, it's going to develop
translate into English.
Yeah.
Translate into plain English.
So anybody that joins Patreon and gives, I think we've got $1 tier and we've got all the way up to like $100 a month tier. All that money goes directly to the scholarship. And we found out that Patreon takes a certain percentage, and we've said that we will personally cover that percentage so that if you give $100, $100 goes to the scholarship.
Cool. Actually, that's a problem with the Ivory Tower in general. Is that, people who are in the cloistered environment of the Ivory Tower sometimes lose perspective with real world application and reality. And that's YouTube is a great way to bring you back down to the real world and how people actually hear what you're doing. And
that's right.
It's a little bit too bad that your field is controversial because I kind of get the sense that you would much prefer it not to be, that you were like looking up like whatever. I don't even know what's not Egyptology. And people are like, yeah, that's really interesting. And nobody cares. I mean, the good news is people care. The bad news is and I'm not so. The British Museum. When's the last time you were at the British Museum? I was there when I was a kid.
It was the last time I was home.
3 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a while ago. Well, no, you went 3 years ago. I went.
Oh, that's right.
When I was pregnant. So the summer of 2017 was the last time I was there. Because they had an exhibition.
The Imperial War Museum. That is my favorite museum in England.
I haven't been to that one in.
Oh, it's so. See, I'm a World War I fanatic and a World War II fanatic. Right. And they have a recreation of a trench. The first time I went to England, I made absolutely certain we went there. I was like salivating to go to because it's England. There's actually in World War I, there's a big, huge part of English history. So it's like, it was mind blowing to me. I mean, cool. But they have actual trench and you're in the trench looking out over no man's land. It's fantastic.
So do they have any of the physical evidence for Wonder Woman, like crossing or?
No, they do not. Did you like Wonder Woman?
I did.
I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Megan, no comment?
Oh, no, I loved it.
She's a Wonder Woman fan.
It was fantastic.
It was good. It was fun. My wife and I went saw it in the theater, actually. My wife liked it.
I think did we go twice? Or did I go once with you and once with someone else?
Probably that.
I think, I went once with you and once with my sisters. But I'm eagerly waiting for our oldest daughter to get a little bit older so I can share it with her. She's a little bit young for it. But
Oh, cool. How old is your daughter?
She's 11.
She just wandered in a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
We have 11, 5, and a 9-month-old.
And they're being raised in America, right?
Well, yes. So the two oldest girls are my stepdaughters. And then Oliver is mine, biologically speaking. And yeah, we're here indefinitely.
Because my wife's friend moved to England for a period of time and raised her kids. So her kids grew up as English, and the difference in manners is like astonishing, which I'm sure you well know. I mean, the difference in manners is like almost unbelievable.
I do insist on manners.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. So does Jen. So does Jen. So does my wife, actually. She does. She's always chastising me for not, whatever I do that's loudest, she chastises me for it. I don't. So this was awesome. This was about as well as.
Thank you for having us on, Craig. I've had a great time.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah, this is about as well as I could have thought it would have gone. I want you guys to come back, and I will give you links to like 1 or 2 Jordan Peterson Bible analytics and 1 or 2, 2 hours of YouTube stuff. Is that
cool.
Doable?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then I'll have you back sometime, like either in January or February. We'll do this again.
And if anybody's interested, tomorrow we're going to be on the Non Sequitur show reading ancient Mesopotamian letters between people.
Yep.
To be
there, you go.
One of the letters says, "You sent me 9 rats. I only ate 1, and I gave the other 8 to the other person they were supposed to go to. And had I known that they were so tasty, I would not have given the other 8.
I'd have kept them."
Wow.
Yeah.
See, the ancient world can be applicable.
Wow. So there you go, kids. The Non Sequitur show tomorrow. Make sure you tune in, and they're going to be reading ancient Mesopotamian letters. That's what you're doing?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, and vote. Tomorrow is the big election. Yep. So get out there and vote, and don't come crying to us if your team lost because you didn't vote.
Don't care who you vote for, just vote.
Right, exactly. We're agnostic about the choices. We find them both abysmal. Honestly, we find them both terrible and pathetic. And Democrat, Republican, I hate them both. So vote for one or the other. But thank you very much. This was fantastic. This was exactly as good as it could have gone. And we'll do it again in a few months.
Sounds great.
Does that sound good?
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And let me turn off. Am I still? Can you still hear me? Or are you gone?
Yeah, we can hear you. I think the live
still
button is still on though.
Yeah, I am. I gotta shut it off. Everybody say goodbye to our new friends.
Bye.
And I think I'm still live. I can't close the screen down.
Well, I tell you what, we'll go ahead and close out. Maybe that'll help.
No, I got it. Stop broadcast. This should be it. Stop broadcast. Because I'll talk to you for a little bit before you go.
Cool.